Alright, welcome back, and now we're into the Introduction to Frames video 4. During this, we're going to look at common fallacies for explaining organizational problems. We'll look at 4 characteristics in organizational learning, and then we'll look at organizational learning. I mean, what does that really mean anyway? And look at kind of 3 of the pioneers and their perspectives on organizational learning. So, let's start off with some common fallacies in explaining organizational problems. We don't need no stinking frames. All we need to do is find someone to blame. And in fact, there are many kind of engineering jokes out there, which has a phase in the project called blame of the innocents, blame of the non-participants. So those people that had absolutely nothing to do with it are used as a scapegoat and blamed for the situation. Happens quite often when you have a challenge with a particular project. Another mechanism is to blame the bureaucracy, to go back and look at the red tape associated with a particular problem, to look at all the rules and regulations governing a particular situation, and then just blaming that, because it's victimless. Who actually is really being blamed when you blame the bureaucracy? The rule makers? Well, the rule makers is a diffuse group. It's not like it's just 1 or 2 people that are causing that particular problem. I had a previous a commander who tried to combat this by having a saying that he used quite freely, that if our policy makes no sense, it is not our policy. And what that was, the kind of intent behind that was that the way we always do things, that rule was not in effect. If that's the only reason you could explain for why we were doing something, that meant it was time to change it. So if the policy made no sense, it was not our policy. The third component associated with this is this idea of thirsting for power. Sometimes folks are looking to move up the organization on the backs of others, claiming credit for what they have done rather than creating credit for the organization. So again, that will cause all sorts of challenges. I think the Enron disaster is an example of that. There was this thirst for power, this thirst or greed for money that led to a breaking of rules that had a catastrophic result. So here are the 3 kind of common fallacies in explaining organizational problems. Let's move into now some of the characteristics associated with organizational learning. So when you look at organizational learning, and the idea here is that you have individuals that learn, and they retain that learning in some form of memory. And the book and research posits that organizations learn and retain a memory of sorts from what they have encountered or experienced throughout their organizational life. And so this has kind of 4 characteristics associated with organizational learning. The first is that organizations are complex. It is not a 1 + 1 = 2 situation. You got some logarithms and tangents and cosines thrown in there that make it a little bit less predictable in terms of how things are going to turn out. A corollary, if you will, to that, and perhaps it ties down to the surprising or deceptive component, is that sometimes this kind of cause and effect takes quite a long time to come to fruition, where you can actually see what's occurring within the organization. And because of that delay, people will draw the wrong conclusions, thinking, hey, that was a really good idea, when in fact it was actually a disastrous idea. But it's a disastrous idea that may take 3 to 5 years to germinate before it comes into full bloom of the crisis and the catastrophic effect that it's going to have on the organization. And then finally, organizations are ambiguous. They're big and clunky, and it's not easy, again, to generate a cause and effect relationship. associated with this. And the book in this exhibit from chapter 2 kind of highlights these 7 components of ambiguity. It talks about we don't know what the problem is. We're not sure what's really happening. We're not sure what our requirements are and what we are really trying to accomplish. We don't have the resources we need to accomplish that, so we're going to have to make compromises knowing all along that that is going to generate a significant risk. We're not sure who is supposed to be doing what because there's so many people involved, or there's some form of shared governance associated with it. We're not sure how to get what we want, and we're not sure how to determine, we don't have those metrics to determine that in fact we've succeeded. It's not neat and tidy. It's complex and surprising and deceptive and ambiguous and possessing ambiguity. So if we look back at some of the kind of pioneers that were working in organizational learning, you have these kind of 3 different perspectives. The first of which goes to we learn best from our experiences, but best summarized, I guess we should say. We learn best from our experience, but we never directly experience the consequences of many of our decisions, and thus we draw the wrong conclusions associated with those decisions. Singe also focused on this idea of system maps, this ability to try to take very complex ideas and move them down so that they were simple enough to understand, but they still captured the nuances of what was going on within the situation. The second kind of perspective looked more at these ideas of a top manager and a middle manager and workers and the tension that you have between them. There was a survey recently that came out looking at what is the #1 emotion felt by top managers, and the answer was frustration. And this frustration came from the sense of being overwhelmed by everything that was going on and the pace at which change was taking place. Middle managers felt trapped between what they were, the pressures and the signals they were receiving from top managers, the pressures and signals they were receiving from the workers, and their ability to try to translate between those 2 different sets of pressures and to move the organization forward. And then finally, workers felt as if they were unable to affect the situation. Their work was unacknowledged, and over time they became demoralized by their inability to affect change within the organization. The final perspective is this idea that certain things we avoid because we really don't want to talk about them. We realize they're going to cause challenges, they're going to bring up uncomfortable circumstances, and sometimes rather than solve those problems, it's easier to just hide them and then just move on, to cooperate and graduate, to just get by the next couple of years so that someone can retire, knowing all along that this is going to cause a significant problem in the future. And then once you're down that path, there comes the exposing the problem and trying to tackle it would expose the cover-up of the problem that had occurred earlier. So again, 3 kind of different perspectives that look at organizational learning. How do organizations learn? There's more in the Desire to Learn Brightspace course, so go back and look at that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and finish up this video. Our next video will be looking at mental models, and we will use a case study of using the Black Hawk disaster from Iraq to explore this situation.